When you log into GreenArrow Studio, it'll take you to the mailing list page. You can see on this system we already have some mailing lists set up, but in your case, on a new system, there won't be any here. So we'll need to create one to get started. First, you'll need to give it a name. The name is primarily for your use. It'll show up in the statistics and around the campaigns so that you know what mailing list you're working with, but it could also show up in our subscription web forms. So you'll want to make sure that it's appropriate for your subscribers to read. Next, we have the option to use custom X headers. These are the headers that show up in the top portion of the email. Subscribers typically don't see this. These are used primarily if you're trying to integrate with a third-party system so that you can pass information from GreenArrow Studio to that application. The exact headers and values that you pass with those headers will be determined by the application that you're connecting with. These aren't typically used, so we leave that off by default. GreenArrow Studio gives you the option to redirect unsubscribes. The default behavior when somebody clicks the unsubscribe button is just to take them to our generic landing page that says you've been unsubscribed. If you'd like to change that behavior, for example, if you want to send them back to your website or take them to a form to ask them why they unsubscribed, you can set that up and put the URL here, and GreenArrow will unsubscribe that subscriber from your mailing list and then forward them on to this URL instead of our generic landing page. The next option is to set this up as a remote list. Studio has the option to connect to a remote database to pull the subscribers for campaigns. This option means that you won't be importing your subscribers or maintaining any of the subscriber data in GreenArrow Studio's database. This feature is mostly outside of the scope of this webinar, but you can take a look at our documentation or ask a system administrator for more details if this is something that you think might be useful to you. The next option is to set the format field for each subscriber. By default, we set this to no, which means every subscriber will receive a multi-part email. This allows the subscriber's email client to choose which version, the plain text or the HTML, to display for that subscriber. If you'd like to dictate this for each subscriber, you can enable this option and it will allow you to set that for each subscriber. The next section allows you to set the campaign defaults. When you go to send a campaign, you'll have to populate all the delivery settings that you want to use for that campaign. These campaign defaults for the mailing list allow you to preset a lot of those settings. This way, if you always use the same setting on all of your campaigns, you don't have to reconfigure or add in any of the new configurations every time. You can just change the ones you need to on a per campaign basis. The first option here is seed lists. A seed list is a group of email addresses that are not subscribed to this mailing list, but that you'd like to receive a copy of this email. One example of a seed list is our GreenArrow Monitor service. This service allows you to send to our seed list, and then it will report on the inbox delivery rates for those email addresses. You may also have an internal address list. For example, maybe your marketing team or management team might want to see the emails that are going out, and you could include those on the internal seed list. They wouldn't be subscribed to the mailing list, so they would only be receiving the campaign if you send to that seed list. Next, we'll set the sending speed. If you set it to 0, GreenArrow Studio will send the campaign as quickly as the hardware will allow or as quickly as your license will allow. During the IP warm-up, you may need to slow down the sending speed so that you don't send too much mail at any given time. By setting the sending speed to 10,000, GreenArrow Studio will spread the 10,000 emails over the course of the hour and send out the mail at a slower, more regulated pace. Next, we need to set the from name and from email. These values are the values that you commonly see when you receive an email. There's some important setup aspects that need to be done on the from email address. We cover this during your installation, but it's important to note that you need to have this properly set up before you move into your production sending. Next, you see we have the option for a sender email address. The sender email address is an option that's available for you to shift the email authentication off of the from address domain. If you have DNS control over this from address domain, then you don't need to add a sender email. The reply to email address only needs to be filled in if you want your replies to go to an address that's different from the from email address. If you leave it blank, any replies to the emails that you send out will go to the from address. The virtual MTA sets what IP address, relay server, or routing rule, which is a group of IPs or relay servers, that you want to send this campaign out on. I'll go into detail on virtual MTAs in a later portion of the webinar, but for now, just know that this is where you choose which virtual MTA that you'd like to use. The URL domain is the domain that gets used in GreenArrow's click and open tracking. Most often you would want this domain to match or be similar to the domain that gets used in the from address. This allows you to get brand consistency throughout the email so that when recipients look at your email, they know exactly where it came from. The bounce email is where any delivery failures are sent, and just like the URL domain, you'll probably want that to match the from address domain. A special sending rule is an advanced feature that we have in the system that will allow you to call a Perl or PHP script for every single email that gets sent. Covering this feature is outside of the scope of this webinar, but if you're interested in it and would like more information, you can find it in our documentation or you can contact support for more details. Next, we have the configuration for split test automatic winner selection. Later on in this webinar, when we create a campaign, you'll see that we have the option to create multiple contents. With split test automatic winner selection disabled, if you, for example, create two contents, content A will go to the first half of the list and content B will go to the second half of the list. With this enabled, you can add some additional logic into that split testing. So for example, if we want to split on the first 10% of the campaign, then 5% of the list will receive content A and 5% will receive content B. Next, we choose a decision delay. This gives your recipients a few minutes or hours or days to react to the emails that you send out. After 4 hours, GreenArrow Studio will look at the first 10% that went out and decide based on one of these metrics which content was the winning content. If we use unique clicks, Studio will look at how many unique clicks each of the contents received. Whichever content received the most unique clicks will go out to the remaining 90% of the mailing list. And finally, we have the option to integrate with Google Analytics. If you use their tool, you can plug in the information here, and doing so will allow those links in your campaign to be tracked within your analytics dashboard.